What's up, Ego Hackers? Welcome to the C.S. Joseph Podcast, Premium Edition. This is Season 32, Episode 3. What is the Octogram of the ENTJ archetype? ENTJ is also known as the Chief, also known as the Napoleon type, for sure, and the Marshall, according to our very own fun-related type grid, naturally. So, it's good to be back. It's cold AF. It actually got well below freezing. And so, Octogram. What is the Octogram? Why is it important? Well, interestingly enough, we're actually going to be releasing Season 34, probably starting next week, hopefully. And Season 34 is basically what is the Octogram. And Chris Taylor is going to be giving us a nice tour of the Octogram, putting it in a layman's terms as much as we can. Overall, my hope is that each of you get to kind of understand the general theme of each Octogram subvariant of each of the types. But even beyond that, like, we've had some recent huge discoveries relating to Octogram that's going to be going even deeper than the content that we have here within the premium lectures. And we're going to be going over some of that content in the masterclass for the upcoming Ego Hacking Your Fear course. And I highly recommend everyone get the opportunity to check out Ego Hacking Your Fear, because it's going to be the first time where we're going to be introducing tactics and strategies for ego hacking your own self so that you can actually increase or have a better life for yourself without necessarily relying on other people to do so. Which is great. You know, yes, we've been teaching how to ego hack others, but it's time we actually release something to help you ego hack yourself. And in this case, we're going to be helping you overcome your fear so that you can have a better life and more improvement. Octogram is extremely important, and it's based on, the Enneagram theory of Jungian analytical psychology. The problem with Enneagram, as I've said many times, is that it combines both nature and nurture. And because it combines both nature and nurture, it is not a reliable source when it comes to understanding the human psyche. I'm very curious, though, because Dario Nardi let it slip to me recently. God bless him. I love Dario. He's one of the greatest people I've met in the science, other than Dr. John Beebe, of course. And he's actually about to release a book, or already has released a book, or in the process of releasing a book that talks about Enneagram. And I was just talking to him like, oh, it's nice that you're doing that, but can we discuss Octogram a little bit, But, I think he might actually have some of the same conclusions that I have. So, yeah. But from an Octogram perspective, Octogram basically is we cut out all the human nature aspects and just focused only on the human nurture piece. And remember, folks, a human being is a Venn diagram of human nature, which is what we have on the type grid, as well as their human nurture, which is what we have in Octogram. And then you combine both of them, and then you basically get a human being, okay? And this is really, really important, because a person has the ability to, adjust their own nurture. People outside of them in their life, from an extroverted perspective, have the ability to adjust their nurture as well. So that can be a thing. Their nurture can impact other people's nurtures. But what we're finding out in the science is that Octogram is absolutely important to almost every aspect of human interaction in terms of Jungian analytical psychology, the four sides of the mind. It's super important. We got a bunch of new competing theories coming out in the very near future that's going to outline all these differences, and I'm very proud, very happy to discuss them. And like I said, Chris is going to be presenting on that in the very near future. That being said, Octogram, in terms of the ENTJ, however, just kind of goes a little bit beyond that. Having at first, I will admit, compared to objective personality system, Dave Powers and what he's done with his psychoanalysis approach, is that there's 512 different combinations, different subtypes of people. And for the longest time, I had a serious problem with that. And then, we got up to the point where it's there's 128 different possible psychological types, available to us in Jungian analytical psychology. But the more we get deeper into it, we come to realize that Dave Powers is actually correct from a 512 perspective. And then we can go even deeper and then get up to 1024. But the point is that we don't really need to keep track of that. There's really no reason. And he's doing it from the functional level. I'm kind of doing it more from the Octogram perspective and working backwards from there. But it's really unnecessary. We really only, what does the day-to-day person need? The day-to-day person just needs to know if they're unconscious developed or subconscious developed, or if they're unconscious focused or subconscious focused, right? And remember, development comes from your childhood, and it can be finished just at the beginning of your adolescence, or it can be extended to being solidified at the end of your adolescence. And then your cognitive focus is basically your brain, from a neuroplasticity perspective, adjusting itself based on the paradigm shifts, the phenomena, and the stimuli that it encounters on a day-to-day basis. So from that perspective, we just have to understand, hey, things change. But you don't have to keep track, there's just understanding the 4 variants of each of the 16 types multiplied by both genders is really all you need to understand. That's basically it. And it's no different from the ENTJ point of view. It's really no different. So Octogram is the interpretation of how nurture impacts our nature. There are 4 paths of nurtural development, whereas the Enneagram tries to combine nature with a bit of nurture. The Octogram is pure nurture, separated from nature, but demonstrating how nurture shapes the expression of our nature. The Octogram reveals the 4 nuanced expressions for each type. Octogram is also our version of subtypes and details why each subtype or variant expresses themselves differently. So the environment plus soft locking. We've discussed soft locking a lot. Soft locking is basically when you could take any of the 16 types, put them together in the room, and you can actually start to see just how their natures literally put people naturally into other sides of their mind, from a psychological perspective. And, that's pretty frustrating. But, the basic principle, as I've explained multiple times, and I think the soft locking episode is December 2022 on Cutting Edge, so check that out. But soft locking basically is that, pessimistic functions can only match pessimistic functions from a cognitive synchronicity perspective, and optimistic functions can only match optimistic functions from a cognitive synchronicity perspective. And if it can't find it in the ego, it's going to look for it in your subconscious, or it's going to look for it in your unconscious, or it may even look for it in your superego. And then you will literally force cognitive transition into those various areas, which is very fascinating if you think about it, because over time, you literally have other people or external stimuli actually determining the development or the growth of your own neural pathways. And that's basically what is happening. And then Octogram ends up becoming the expression of those neural pathways being grown as a result of your neuroplasticity, which is absolutely amazing. So let's just blaze through this so we can get into the meat of this. All right, so our environment forces us to prefer one side of the mind over the other. Our family, communities, life experiences we face pressure our brains through neuroplasticity to adapt to our environment. Soft locking is the engine for Octogram and nurtural development. Environment either enables or disables the expression of our ego. If you cannot express your ego fully in your environment, like a childhood, for example, the pressure will lead to the other sides of your mind. However, your psyche is always trying to achieve its cognitive origin, even from a different side of the mind. And that's ultimately the point. The point is that, at the end of the day, everyone is trying to reach their cognitive origin. And the cognitive origin of the ENTJ is literally purpose. But they are consumers of purpose. They're not necessarily producers of purpose. And that's something that we learned from the Rosetta Stone. If you don't know what the Rosetta Stone is, it's one of the greatest discoveries that we've had in Jungian analytical psychology, and it is discussed at length in the Ego Hacking by Text Masterclass. If you don't have the Masterclass, make sure you get the course at egohackingbytext.com, or and then afterwards, you'll have an opportunity to buy the Masterclass. But if you already own the course, you can go to offers.csjoseph.life/EBT-Masterclass. You can find it there. You can get the Masterclass so you can check it out. That being said, check out the Masterclass, learn the Rosetta Stone, and just see, because we also go into the love languages and how that works, from cognitive origins, etc. But you can see how the ENTJ is a consumer of purpose. They're constantly seeking out their life purpose and adjusting their purpose as time goes on throughout their lives. That's the main point. That's what they do. Okay? So Soft locking refines your ego enablement, or expands it, or ego disablement, which is forcing expansion to the other sides of your mind. So why does that matter? Like, for example, let's say you're an ENTJ, you have a parent who is an NI user, and they don't really allow you to have freedom of choice because they are putting their freedom above themselves. This usually happens, like, for example, if you have an ESTP or an ISTP parent, and they are basically taking up all of the freedom space within the context of your immediate family or your nuclear family, and not allowing you, the ENTJ child, make any decisions. They make all the decisions for you, so they don't even give you the room for NI, and instead they want you to be all about their decisions. So they want you to use your extrovert intuition critic. So you start developing, through soft locking, your extrovert intuition critic, which makes you more unconscious developed because your extrovert intuition critic happens to land inside of your INTP unconscious side of your mind as an ENTJ. That's an example of that. Okay, so it makes you more unconscious developed. So soft locking is the result of your life circumstances pushing you along the path to enlightenment. Your life and circumstances that are leading to cognitive integration. And we talk a lot about cognitive integration within Season 19. And Season 19 is available with the Discover package to discover all. It's just when you go to csjoseph.life/portal and you see all the Discover XYZ type. Each of those has one Season 19 episode for that type in those. Please review those. That's cognitive integration. Okay, that's what we talk about there. So anyway, so whatever your archetype is, according to the type grid, plus your origin, so ENTJ plus cognitive origin of purpose divided by soft locking equals your octogram. That's basically how it goes. So for example, ENTJs are seeking purpose because they're consumers of purpose. They're all about goals, achievements that orient them towards a specific outcome that lead to tangible results. They seek purpose for the sake of creating a legacy worth sharing and leaving behind, something that they want to be proud of, they want to be remembered for. Legacy is everything. Like, for example, Ray Kroc, he's the McDonald's guy. He is an ENTJ, but then he left his legacy behind, not just McDonald's, but also with the Salvation Army. You want to check that up. And that is an example of this man's legacy, and I very much enjoy his legacy often. So also, paradigm shifts, such as moving out of your house, taking a new lever, changing careers, jobs, having a child, or starting over in a new city often forces paradigm shifts in your psyche, changing your cognitive focus. This means that cognitive focus is far more variable, whereas cognitive development is far more static. This is often why childhood determines cognitive development, and adolescence determines your first cognitive focus. As you age, circumstances change, your focus changes along with it. I do have to add a note here, though, and it's funny because I literally just experienced this just before filming this lecture. There's a gentleman by the name of Adrian. He's from New York, and he just moved back here from New York, and he had brain surgery. And I could tell that this man used to be an ENTJ, and he was a lawyer, a business lawyer, and whatnot. But because of his brain surgery and the trauma that his brain has done, it is really, really adjusted his brain. And he seemed like he used to be a subconscious developed ENTJ, and now he is unconscious developed because he's utilizing the INTP side of his mind way more than he did before. And it's almost to the point where it's jarring. It's so interesting because he's trying so hard to be direct, but he can't help it. And now he's getting more and more informative as time goes on. And I just saw it's absolutely fascinating. So from a brain trauma point of view, you can actually change your cognitive development. But usually it's your childhood and a little bit of adolescence that really establishes your cognitive development, and you're not really going to be able to get away from that, hard as you try. Hard as you try. So yeah, there are 4 variants of the ENTJ. Now we're getting into the cool part. So the first variant is obviously the subconscious developed, subconscious focused ENTJ. And the overall theme of this particular variant of ENTJ is there's plenty to go around. And honestly, I had the pleasure of knowing an ENTJ who was subconscious developed, subconscious focused. So he was actually my mentor. One time, when I was homeless, he came up to me and he's like, "Yo, you're Chase?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Do you know computers?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Follow me." I'm like, "So I did." He's like, "You want to make some money?" I'm like, yeah. So he brings me into the Starbucks. He sets me down, right? And he shows me his laptop. And he's like, "Hey, can you do this?" I'm like, "Yeah, I can do this." He's like, okay, I need you to impersonate me. I'm like, yeah, okay, I'll impersonate you. So he had me impersonate him at a Fortune 500 company and basically do his job for him so that he could fly around the world filming Hollywood movies because he's a Hollywood film producer. Plenty to go around. This guy was so immature. This man was so unbelievably immature. But somehow everything just worked out for him, like consistently. It consistently worked out for him. And it was almost like miraculous how he was so egregiously immature, but somehow everything in his life just worked out. This is like one of those people where, like, you know, just everything just falls out of the sky or falls into their lap, basically. And it's just like, who the hell is this guy? How is he able to just get all these opportunities just thrown at him? You know, so anyway, I agreed to impersonate him, and then, you know, eventually he started making music videos for A-list recording artists and did a really great job doing that. And then I used that money that I made from him to become an arms dealer and arms manufacturer for a while, which was fun. But then also because of this man, because this SDSF ENTJ in my life, that's where I met my first ESTP mentor who taught me real psychology, Mr. Robert Bryant, God bless him. And then from there, I was able to you know, progress from there and then basically take over the science and then, you know, be the pioneer of the science that I am today, which has been pretty awesome to have that opportunity. So with that being said, like, it was an amazing situation, and he just had this attitude of there's plenty to go around. I have never met someone so generous in my life, and he was so trusting, kind of like how an INTJ can become so insanely trusting so quick, you know, especially like when they're gullible, when they're leading with their virtue of trust. It almost as if this guy was like an INTJ leading with this virtue of trust. But I mean, I don't know, it was just amazing. And he was so artistic. I can't believe how artistic this man was. It's unbelievable. You know, and that man is everything to me. Too bad, you know, him and I had a falling out because eventually I just couldn't deal with his lack of maturity, which ended up putting me at personal risk. And then he blamed me for putting him at risk when it was actually him setting me up for failure. Still love him though. I'd really like the opportunity to reconnect with him and just, you know, like, hey man, sorry, I fucked up, whatever. I know you fucked up too, but, you know, let's just let bygones be bygones and be friends again, because I actually think you're pretty awesome, you know, and I can't help but speak highly of him to other people and being willing to give me a shot and take a risk, because honestly, without him, I would have never gotten out of homelessness, you know, and for him to be that example to me, you know, when I was in my mid-20s, I mean, quite frankly, it saved my life. It even gave me an opportunity to feed my children, because I was such a loser in those days. You know, between him and my ESTP mentor, I didn't really have anyone else. You know, yeah, my family was a little bit there for me throughout homelessness, which I really appreciated, you know, what they were able to do. But at the same time, you know, my parents would just look down on me as some kind of burden. You know, they're these people who had the attitude of like, okay, we're just going to kick you out of the nest and hopefully you fly on your own, haha. And it's like, okay, well, apparently, you know, I'm just nothing more than a burden to you, you know, okay, fair enough. You know, there's not really much I could have done. So, but anyway, SDSF ENTJs are hyper-developed in their ISFP subconscious and are more expressive and usually relaxed than the other ENTJ variants. Oh my God, that's true. This guy was almost too relaxed. It even got to the point where I was like assuming that he was basically, I don't know, I would literally assume that he was perpetually like high on marijuana, and every now and then he'd smoke, but like he just came off that way, even though he really wasn't. He was like the most hippy dippy ENTJ you've ever met, you know. And then SDSF ENTJs look at their pursuits as artistic extensions of themselves, and they express themselves through. This guy was absolutely obsessed with filmmaking, absolutely obsessed. He had to do everything relating to filmmaking, and he had these amazing red camera. He had the original red camera. He also had the Epic M. Oh, it was beautiful technology. I was so impressive. Oh, it was so good. So good. I loved it. I loved it. Every moment. I even had the opportunity to actually be a DIT for him on one of his films. And I was so honored that I was even given that opportunity to actually do that. I couldn't believe it. It was great. So it was a great experience. And I met a lot of really cool people with him. But sadly, I was also an idiot in my 20s and not a very good person, and kind of drug him down in a few cases. And I regret that too, and I'd take full responsibility for that if he ever gave me the opportunity to speak to him again. So, I wasn't perfect. Honestly, in my 20s, I was a shitler. Let's be honest. So, but yeah, SDSF ENTJs are bulldozers and wrecking balls, overcoming and smashing through obstacles with their willpower and uncanny certainty that things will always work out. Yeah, because literally everything just falls in their lap for some reason. And it's like, wow, dude, why does everything have to fall in your lap all of a sudden? It's like you have liquid luck everywhere you go in your life. And it's just like, oh my God, really? You're so immature, yet you have everything just falling in your lap. It's just hilarious. So they don't value strategy or careful planning as much as unconscious developed ENTJs. Ain't it the truth? But still manage to find a way. Ain't it the truth? They often give too much. Yeah, this guy had a serious problem giving way too much, to the point where it actually put his family at risk. And his ISFJ wife was just so upset at him all the time about that. All the time. And, yeah. And sometimes SDSF ENTJs are generous so that they can feel better about themselves, and not because the resources given were actually what the other person needed. For example, throwing money at a project when their knowledge or expertise is more necessary. Yeah, he had a problem with throwing money around instead of actually teaching or conferring knowledge together. There was one project I was working for him one time where we were working on a SharePoint project, and we really needed his knowledge and expertise, and he just expected me to just do it without even telling me what to do. And he said, I have faith in you to do it. And I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. I want you to do it. Okay, yeah, sure. But are you going to show me how to do it? I'm just an ENTP here. I don't have expert sensing. Come on. And even in those days, I was more like UDSF instead of UDUF. So I wasn't really so focused on my personal performance in those days to begin with. And for some reason, he just couldn't do it, and that became a huge area of stress for me, ultimately, a huge area of stress. And I ended up failing on that project, and then he fired me. So I'm like, okay, so you set me up for failure on a SharePoint project, and then you fired me. Great. I didn't really know, come on, man. And that's really my biggest beef with him at the time. But then again, also, I don't know, you could argue it both ways. That's just my side. His side of the story is also relevant too, because there's failures on both sides. So let's be honest. I'm not entirely throwing him under the bus here. So, and then also they often covert contract with their investments, expecting return without communicating it. Oh my God. Yeah, he did that too. That was a big problem as well. He's always trying to get special treatment from me in exchange for the special treatment he gave me. But then, I'd just be like, okay, yeah, but the treatment that I gave you, or the treatment that you gave me, it was underwhelming. It was underwhelming. So it's do I have to give you overwhelming special treatment in exchange for your underwhelming special treatment? That too ends up becoming a big problem. And then SDSF ENTJs also feel the most satisfied with what they have achieved, and sometimes don't feel the need to push themselves because I'm already accomplished. This is kind of like when you see an ENTJ start resting on their laurels. SDSF ENTJs have a thing where they can actually rest on their laurels to a point, and it's almost as if they're getting too comfortable about various things and various approaches. But that's not exactly. It's just I don't know, it's just look at this big thing I achieved. Okay, I'm going to go take a 2-year sabbatical and be completely unproductive. And then boom, they just become this very gluttonous person for a couple of years because they had this great achievement. So when it comes to productivity, it's feast or famine from their point of view. They're feast or famine, and it's just so frustrating. It is really frustrating. And then we have the SDUF ENTJs, which are known as complacency and greed. So remember, for SDSF, that's complacency, generosity. Complacency meaning they're more naive. He's very naive, very immature ENTJ. But then you have the complacency, greed. So this is a greedy person who's also naive at the same time. And, again, SDUFs often have the baddest rap out of all of the 16 types when it comes to their Octogram variants. SDUF, it's just wow, bad rap. You can just assume bad rap just off the bat, and that usually sucks. And the theme for them is, my purpose should be provided by you, etc. So yeah, my purpose should be provided by you. And that's like a kind of interesting form of entitlement. So remember, SDSF ENTJs, which is complacency, generosity, these are the people who have been entirely enabled by their parents. And my former ENTJ mentor, he was hella enabled by his parents. I've actually met his parents. They're really cool people. But they severely enabled both of their children, both their boys. They had an ESFP and an ENTJ as boys. The ENTJ was the firstborn. The secondborn was the ESFP. They hella enabled them, hella spoiled them. And they're both SD in terms of their cognitive development because there's just a high amount of spoiling. It's just absolutely fascinating that is a thing. They even have like crazy hippie names, which is kind of cool. But regardless, the SDUF ENTJ, these are the people who are hella enabled as a childhood, but then all of a sudden when they hit adulthood, that entire support structure is completely ripped out from under them, and then they become subconscious, developed unconscious focused. It's like, okay, yeah, I'm pretty naive, but because I can't get my needs met, all of a sudden I have to actually like be greedy. So yeah. My purpose should be provided to you. So the SDUF ENTJs are basically, in my opinion, the most entitled ENTJs out there. Like, they're super entitled. They're consumers of purpose, and they literally just want their purpose to fall in their lap, and they're looking to other people to, grant them their purpose. This actually makes the SDUF ENTJ the most easily manipulated ENTJ out there. And as long as you could satisfy their greed, you basically have them. You have them exactly where you want them. And it makes them so easy to be ego hacked from that perspective, because it's just like, oh, you're really naive, so you're not really going to see what I'm up to. And then if I just satisfy your greed every now and then, I basically have you at the end of a pole or the end of a leash, and you don't even know how easily controlled you are, from an ego hacking perspective. And, it sucks to be them. It really does. Here they are, spoiled and enabled as a child, but all of a sudden they get to adulthood and they don't even have that. They have zero access to that afterwards. And that really sucks. Really sucks to be them in that particular situation. And I'm just like shaking my head and I'm like, oh my God. I would not want to be SDUF in any of the 16 types, but for them, that's just kind of what happened. So SDUF ENTJs are developed in their ISFP subconscious, but often through realizing that they are immature, push toward their INTP unconscious to develop more maturity. Complacency greed happens when the ENTJ was given everything as a child, but then as an adult never gained the skills of how to get what they want on their own. They use greed to get what they want. SDUF ENTJs struggle with believing they are owed their purpose by others, and where greed expresses itself as entitlement. As they realize others don't always provide them with support for their purpose, the ENTJ is forced to look inward and learn how to achieve their goals on their own. So they end up these are the people who are dependent but trying to become independent, and they will also sacrifice other people. They kind of view people like chess pieces. They're willing to sacrifice other people for their own personal gain. So you've got to be really, really careful around SDUF ENTJs. The thing is, though, is that that's not necessarily a bad thing because, for example, their golden pair, INTP golden pair, who is UDSF, actually really appreciates to be around these people because, these are the people who have sticks at their butts and or are entirely OCD and kind of need that little bit of a free spirit, at least, with other people, because they can tend to be a bit servile. They realize it's like, oh, I need to be more servile because, I'm mature, and it's the mature thing to do to serve others, basically. And of course, the ENTJ, the SDUF ENTJ is waiting around the corner for their INTP golden pair to actually pull that off. I will admit that based on, my decisions, throughout my own life, in terms of the people that I allow in my inner circle, I've only actually had just one SDUF ENTJ in my life at one point in time. There's a gentleman who actually used to work for me, and a very fascinating dude. It was so interesting because he was trying to be behind the scenes, with his INTP unconscious, and he did work for me. He's a really cool dude. But then he got caught up in some big scandal involving a very loose woman who happened to have a relationship with a sexual relationship with many of my team members simultaneously. It ended up bringing, and that woman ended up bringing a lot of our guys down and cost the company a lot of money and ended up ruining a lot of lives in the process. And he got basically in the middle of that. But consistently, he always had this attitude of like, yeah, Chase, you owe me purpose. You owe me, you got to tell me exactly what you want from me and how to get it. And it was really hard for him to actually take initiative. He just wanted everything served up to him on a silver platter. And here he was trying to be mature, thinking that that was the mature thing to do, when the reality of the situation is, it's like, I just needed him to actually, take some initiative, be a little bit more responsible, and get his NI parent out, and like be responsible as an NI parent. But instead, no, he's relying on the parent function of his INTP side way more because he's unconscious focus, which is extroverted intuition critic. So he's constantly telling me like, hey, you need extroverted sensing child to tell me what you want, NE critic. And it was just this endless thing over and over and over. And then eventually he just became a drain. He just became a drain on the team. He became a drain on me. And then eventually everything just blew up on his face because his naivete ended up causing him to get caught up in a love triangle between him and another team member with the same woman who was in a relationship with multiple team members on the CSJ team without any of these people having any prior knowledge of that, which is kind of embarrassing. And he had to deal with being a victim of that embarrassment, which caused him ultimately to leave the team. So, which I don't blame him. I mean, it's his choice, but the reality of the situation is that he can't be walking around expecting other people, at least expecting me, to tell him what his purpose is. It was entirely inappropriate, and to be fair, it would be, I just decided, like SDUF ENTJs is probably best if I just not stick around for those kinds of ENTJs, like they're really, really draining, and I don't need people in my life that are like being a drain to me. I need people in my life who are like actually providing relief. I mean, I am U to UF as an ENTP, like that's just kind of basic. So let's move on to the next variant, which is the first unconscious developed variant, which is the UDSF ENTJ, which statistically is the most successful of the ENTJs. So like, for example, if you are a UDSF type, your unconscious developed, subconscious focus, those types end up becoming the most successful variants of the 16 types. So the UDSF ENTJ, which is the subjugation generosity. Subjugation means you're going out of your way to control other people for their benefit. That's what it means to subjugate others, right? You are controlling other people, you are enslaving other people, you are directing other people for the sake of their benefit. For their benefit. Fair enough. And the theme that they have for themselves is, quote, my purpose is found through investing in others, which is very good. I love that. I love that theme. UDSF ENTJs, probably my favorite. I also like UDUF ones as well. I just like unconscious developed NTJs. They're just awesome. So UDSF ENTJs learn to rely on their INTP unconscious for survival, but found places of acceptance later in life that allowed them to foster their expressiveness through inventiveness and resourcefulness. UDSF ENTJs seek to invest in those who will submit to their subjugation. Both unconscious developed ENTJ variants will test others by seeing how capable they are of using the ENTJ's investment, so time, resources, knowledge, etc., in order for the ENTJ to determine if that person is worth being generous to. So they have like this litmus test or this process basically from which they're going. And that's good because like a UDSF ENTJ is just not going to like allow somebody, to, be around them by default. It's just not going to happen, and from that point of view, it's great because they have a vetting process. They realize that, the mature thing to do is to vet people, but then they give enough acceptance to other people through their subconscious focus and being accepting of others because they allow themselves to have sympathy for other people. And therefore, they're exploring with their ISFP subconscious specifically, okay, who is worth investing into? I need to figure that out through my unconscious development, through my INTP side, but then actually do it with my ISFP side, which is pretty awesome. And that's Ray Dalio. This Ray Dalio is an excellent example of a UDSF ENTJ. He wrote the book Principles. If you're an ENTJ and you haven't read the book Principles by Ray Dalio, what are you doing with your life? Seriously, like you're probably like living in a dumpster or something. Wake up, go get that book, read it, understand it, and just know that is the entire point of view of an unconscious, developed, subconscious, focused ENTJ. And the entire book is literally about how to find people worth investing in, and then what to do, what process to follow, or what are the principles behind investing in others so that you can be successful as a result of your investment in them, but they too could be successful as a result of your investment in them as well. I also know another UDSF ENTJ. His name is Titus. Fantastic fellow. He's been really helping out with the CSJ team, with the Ego Hacker community, with what we're doing for Ucha and whatnot. Very, very good human being. Very high moral fiber. Taking care of family, taking care of business. I have great respect for this man. And he continues to amaze on a regular basis. Now, also, both the unconscious developed subjugating ENTJ variants tend towards marionetting, basically mind control or controlling other people's behavior by dictating others' actions in order to achieve the task at hand. For unconscious developed subconscious focused ENTJs, they control others for what they believe the other person's benefit. By doing what I tell you, we all win. And that's basically Ray Dalio's point. If you just do what I tell you to do, we're all going to benefit here. And it's because, like, for example, don't forget, ENTJs are systematic. They're focused on doing the best thing and finding the absolute best way of doing something. But their ISFP subconscious is there because they're subconscious focused, where they understand that, just because it might be the best way of doing something, if it doesn't cover other people's interests, they're probably not going to be successful. So these UDSF ENTJs end up having a little bit more awareness, interest-based awareness through their ISFP subconscious. And this basically allows them to set up systems that also, help other people's interests. And these are the best ENTJs to work for. These are the ones that are actually going to treat people like human beings. These are the ones that are actually going to make systems with people in mind, and not just to, force everyone to, be monkey see, monkey do. They don't treat people like machines, like what UDUF ENTJs tend to do. And then UDSF ENTJs are very careful with their generosity and care more than their subconscious developed counterparts about long-term consequences of their generosity. How others handle their investment is a reflection of the ENTJ's own legacy and worthiness. Yeah, and this is how they protect their inferior function. They protect their inferior function by protecting their investment in other people, okay? That's what it's all about, protecting their investment in other people. They're not going to, they'll give a man a fish just to see what the guy will do it. So it's like, hey, I'm going to try you out, basically. And it's part of their litmus test. It's like, hey, I'm going to give you this little investment. I'm going to throw a fish. Let's see what you do with it, And if they see this person themselves take that fish and actually get like some kind of ROI or some kind of return on investment on their own, basically, that return on investment, that will signal to the UDSF ENTJ that person is worth investing in, which is pretty great. It's pretty great. The thing is, though, is that they need to make sure that they remain being wise. They got to be wise with their unconscious development within their INTP, because remember, it's the INTP's job to teach a man a fish, not necessarily give a man a fish. So eventually they have to make sure that whoever they're giving that fish to, that person already has the capability to bring some return on investment, or the ENTJ is willing to teach that person what to use that fish for, right? And then potentially teach that person how to get return on investment, right? Well, you won't see the subconscious developed ENTJs doing that, but that's what the unconscious developed ones do, especially the UDSF ones, because the UDSF ones are aware that other people are actually human, okay? Which is pretty great. And now the most controversial, the UDUF. Now, before we go into UDUF, I just want to make a reminder, when it comes to people's octograms, okay? So remember, cognitive origins, okay? Cognitive origins matter, and at the first layer of the octogram, we're doing a primary cognitive origin. So cognitive origin of the ENTJ is purpose, but the cognitive origin of the INTP is discovery. If you are SDSF, you are basically trying to get 3 helpings of purpose. You are just Mr. Purpose. Purpose, 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 purpose. Everything matters about purpose. Whereas if you're SDUF, you are looking for basically 2 helpings of purpose and 1 helping of discovery. The same thing for UDSF. You're also looking for 2 helpings of purpose and 1 helping of discovery. However, with the UDUF ENTJ, that's a little bit different. They are actually looking for 2 helpings of discovery and 1 helping of purpose. So they're all about exploration. They're all about discovery, and that, if personal discovery, and then that basically becomes their purpose. Discovery and exploration on their own becomes the purpose for their life for the UDUF ENTJ. And that is why UDUF ENTJ, also known as the subjugation greed version of the ENTJ, they are an atypical octogram, just like the SDSF is also atypical. And that is, their theme is, I will forge my purpose through my own will. I will forge my purpose through my own will. And these are the hyper-independent, Sigma male-like ENTJs. They really want to do everything themselves. They want to be able to achieve everything on their own steam and not really rely on anyone else. They are hyper-independent. It can make it very difficult for them to be in relationships with other people because of how hyper-independent they are. They're also very hyper-systematic. These are what you would call the triple systematic ENTJs, basically, focused on the best way of doing something, and they don't really care about the interests of other people. That's why when they design systems for people that work under them, those systems don't really have people in mind, and oftentimes UDUF ENTJs are treating other people like machines, as you've heard me criticize ENTJs in general for in the past. That is definitely a thing. And that's where you get people who are watching my videos and be like, well, I don't really identify with that. I'm like, yeah, because that's not your octogram. That's why. That's why you don't identify with that piece. Even though I'd say it is definitely behavior attached to one of the 16 types or to the ENTJ, for example, well, that's not attributable to your octogram. So, of course, you're going to not identify with that, which is so frustrating. But I get it. We weren't talking about Octogram when Season 3 first came out. Now that we are, people are getting like an entirely new perspective and starting to identify with things because we have the octogram now. So UDUF ENTJs have had to stretch themselves fully into their INTP shadow and even ESFJ superego to siphon in purpose so that they could survive. These are the people who had an extremely rough upbringing where they are completely disabled and not enabled. They are completely disabled by their immediate families, by the nuclear families growing up. They've had it rough. And they've had it rough in their youth. They've had it rough in their childhood. They've had it rough in their adolescence. They've had it rough in their 20s. They've had it rough in their adulthood. And they continue to have it rough, basically. These are also the most depressed ENTJs out there. UDUF ENTJs are unlikely to have had a childhood environment that supported their freedom and the pursuit of their purpose and personal expression. UDUF ENTJs will protect their purpose at all costs. Others took away their purpose as children, and they were likely not allowed to have much of a purpose in adolescence. But in later adolescence and adulthood, UDUF ENTJs realized that the only way they could find and achieve their purpose is if they did it themselves. Again, they are hyper-independent. This is like the Sigma male ENTJ, for example. And these people are very much willing to sacrifice other people for the purpose of their purpose, basically, for the purpose of reaching their purpose, basically. They're willing to do that. They're willing to sacrifice other people to gain that particular advantage. As ridiculous as that sounds, that's what they're willing to do. These are the ENTJs that climb the corporate ladder. These are the ones that fight dirty at every opportunity they can, and they will do whatever it takes to gain that advantage, no matter what, even if it harms other people. So, okay. UDF ENTJs live from a scarcity mindset. That's true. As far as purpose is concerned, subjugation allows them to steward the resources gathered from their greed with hyper-efficiency. Greed is a survival mechanism. UDUF ENTJs subjugate others for my benefit or the plan's benefit and not so much for other people's benefit. They rarely experience anyone planning for their benefit, So they believe they always have to subjugate in order to get what they want. These people are the hyper-controlling ENTJs. And if they're not controlling people, they don't feel comfortable. The only way they can even feel comfortable is if they are in control in some capacity. And that's just how they live life. And again, it comes from the fact that they've been entirely disabled as children. And it really sucks. UDUF ENTJs risk destroying their relationships with others at the cost of their goals. Understandably so, as it was the relationships with others, like parents, siblings, early on in life that caused suppression of their purpose to begin with, right? And then UDUF ENTJs likely had to burn their relationships to get free in the first place. But if Expert Feeling Demon continues to burn everyone, the ENTJ will have no one to share their legacy and achievements with. That's why UDUF ENTJs are often super lonely and very alone. Kind of like Sheryl Sandberg of Facebook. There are some people that will help you get even more purpose and more discovery than you could ever achieve on your own. And that's the thing. It's super, super difficult for UDF ENTJs to even connect with other people. They struggle with it. It's like their biggest problem, because to them, people are chess pieces, people are tools. Now, UDSF ENTJs see people as chess pieces and tools as well, but they recognize at least that the chess pieces are human, the chess pieces have their own goals, the chess pieces have their own interests. The UDUF ENTJ just completely ignores that and doesn't even care. As long as their own interests and as long as their own purpose is handled, they're pretty good in that direction. UDUF ENTJs are extremely self-serving, the most self-serving, in as much as the SDSF ENTJs are also extremely self-serving. However, they're self-serving after they've been generous to a point, whereas the UDUF ENTJ is just self-serving right off the bat, like immediately. Like that's just how it is by default, right? Which kind of is rough, kind of rough. So those are the descriptions of the four different variants of ENTJ. Now let's talk about social engineering and ego hacking from the perspective of the Octogram when it comes to the ENTJ. So the social engineering implications of the Octogram: if cognitive origin never changes, regardless of development and focus, then giving ENTJs their origin through their preferred poles is the best way to reach them. So from a subjugation perspective, if you're dealing with an unconscious developed ENTJ, they best respond to by accepting the ENTJ's planning and asking them to guide you on the next steps. Showing respect for their ability to plan and submitting to what plan makes them feel worthy. However, if they are complacent ENTJs, the complacency pole is best met by helping the ENTJ express themselves and rewarding them for their fearlessness in the risks they take. Support their artistic and expressive pursuits as they rely on the development of their introverted feeling inferior for the achievement of their cognitive origin known as purpose. Both the four sides dynamics in the Octogram are dynamic, but the Octogram is even more so because it deals exclusively with nurture. The deeper implication of an Octogram variant is to understand how the other temple origins are siphoned in through its poles. So, for example, check out the Ego Hacking by Text masterclass. So, yeah. Those are the different variants of ENTJ, and I've known a few different ENTJs, of each of these different variants, and it's so interesting to see how they are. For example, SDSF ENTJ, my former ENTJ mentor, and through him I met Robert Bryant, my ESTP mentor, who taught me the psychology, is literally the reason why I get to talk to you folks right now. And then also. Then we have, my former team member who was an ENTJ for a while. He's SDUF. And then Ray Dalio, he's UDSF as well. And then also from there, the UDUF ENTJ. And honestly, to date, I've only known like a few UDUF ENTJ females in terms of women, which kind of makes sense because women today, especially in the United States of America, are conditioned, under feminism to think they can basically have it all and achieve everything on their own because, they're told that the patriarchy is down on women and don't really give women choices, and they're hyper defensive of their choice. And then you combine that with being disabled as children because maybe their parents are telling them you have to prepare yourself to be parents, you have to be a mother, you have to prepare yourself, to get a man and be beautiful when they're really hyper masculine, as women basically for ENTJs. And I've noticed that just UDUF as an octagram variant is just way more common amongst ENTJ women, so it's kind of rare to see other ENTJ men, at least with UDUF. I haven't really seen it very often. It's just kind of a rare thing. So anyway, folks, that's it for season 32, episode 3. Thanks for watching and listening, and I'll see you guys in the next premium lecture. Later.